Good evening. Boris Johnson has launched the Conservative election campaign hours after visiting Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen following the dissolution of Parliament. He addressed supporters this evening after a day which saw the resignation of one of his cabinet colleagues. The Welsh Secretary, Alun Cairns, stepped down because of his links with a man who had sabotaged a rape trial. Our political editor, Kuenssberg, is at the Conservative launch in Birmingham. We can join her now.
Thanks, Hugh. Well, this is not the backdrop that the Conservatives would have chosen for their campaign. We've looked through the mists of political history and we cannot find any election campaign when a serving cabinet minister had to quit. But campaigns are what about goes wrong, but also about the razzmatazz. And there was plenty of that when the Prime Minister took to the stage in Birmingham tonight.
He's been one of the best-known politicians in the country for a decade. But fame and having faith are not the same thing. He may be the Tory party's darling, but he wants you to trust him and to stay in number 10.
I didn't want an election, and no Prime Minister, frankly, I love my job, no Prime Minister wants an election, particularly when I'm enjoying. There's so much that we want to get on and do, but my friends, we have no choice. The whole Brexit delay is holding us all back. It's like a bendy bus. I banned them in London. A bendy bus jackknifed on a yellow box junction.
Laughter and adoration in this room. But if clearing a crop of MPs is the answer, why should the new ones be from his side?
We've get this deal through Parliament and then get on with all the fantastic projects in which this government is engaged, uniting and levelling up our country, giving people opportunity across our country with better education, better infrastructure and new technology. That is what this government is all about. It's about giving hope and chance.
Get used to hearing this.
This country is aching to move on. So let's make next year the year of prosperity and growth. Let's get Brexit done, my friends, and get on with our project of sensible, moderate, tax-cutting, one nation conservatism, spreading hope and opportunity across the whole of the UK.
Hang on. A loud cheering crowd doesn't drown out Tory woes. Like a small clutch of protesters here tonight, there will be many people who just don't buy it. And a minister had to quit this morning. Yesterday, the Welsh Secretary was nervously scratching his head in Cabinet. At lunchtime today, he resigned after claims he knew about a former member of staff's role in collapsing a rape trial.
One of your colleagues had to quit this morning.
I think that Boris just showed today why he's the right person to be Prime Minister. He's got out there, fantastic speech just now, great reception, and I think we're all ready.
There's always noise, but at the heart of it, there is a message, and here we've got the clearest possible message. Only the Conservative Party can get Brexit done.
You can't pretend that it hasn't been a tricky 24 hours.
Well, you know, there are always problems in any campaign, but Boris has just given us really good reasons to be cheerful, you know, the bright future.
A glossy rally is one thing, but he is risking it all. Win, he'll get his Brexit and maybe 5 years in number 10. Fail, and Jeremy Corbyn will be right behind instead.
I welcome Jeremy Corbyn.
For 4 years, his ranks of supporters have dreamt of him walking through Downing Street's door. Like his rival, he wants to move on from the mess.
Westminster hasn't exactly covered itself in glory recently. You're right to feel frustrated with the political system because it's not working for you. Politics should be about your life, your community, your job.
But on what to do instead, their solutions are different, very different.
If the British people elect a Labour government on the 12th of December, I will be proud to be a Labour Prime Minister. But I have to warn you, it will be very different. Because I was not born to rule. None of us in this room were born to rule. The politics that I stand for is about sharing power and wealth with people who don't have a lot of money, don't have friends in high places, so they can take control of their own lives.
The two contenders for the top job can both pack a room, both prompt cheers and chants on their own side. But they both divide too. Which one will govern? That's down to you. Kuenssberg, BBC News, Birmingham.
Let's go live to the Senedd in Cardiff Bay tonight, and Felicity Evans, our Wales political editor, is there, who broke the story about Alun Cairns yesterday. And Felicity, I'm just wondering, what is your reading of this whole controversy, the Cairns controversy, on the political landscape in this election in Wales?
Well, Hugh, I think the Conservative campaign in Wales is in some disarray tonight because, as Welsh Secretary, Alun Cairns was supposed to be the person leading that campaign, and there is no obvious successor to that role. Mr Cairns himself denies any wrongdoing. He believes that the inquiry into his conduct will clear his name, and he is still standing as a candidate in this general election. And obviously there is some damage that's been done to this campaign. Inevitably, it's not the start that they wanted, but Conservative candidates around Wales will be hoping that they can draw a line under this now. The thing is, I'm not convinced that they can. The fact is, we simply cannot know what voters will make of the fact that the Welsh Conservatives chose to select as a candidate for the Welsh Assembly a man whom a judge accused of sabotaging a rape trial. Now, that man has now been suspended as a candidate, of course, but the rape victim herself says she is distressed that not a single senior Welsh Conservative figure has yet apologised for that. So I don't think this is going away, Hugh.
Felicity, once again, many thanks. Felicity Evans there, our Wales political editor in Cardiff Bay. Well, as we've heard, the Prime Minister was in Birmingham this evening, but speaking outside number 10 Downing Street earlier today, Mr Johnson set out the broad message of his campaign. So what is the policy offer from the Conservatives at this election? Our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, has been listening to some of the questions that people have been asking.
Can Boris Johnson deliver Brexit?
Well, of all the main parties, he's the only leader who'd take Britain straight out of the European Union if the Tories win outright. No more referendums, no more wrangling over the withdrawal agreement. That's the terms of divorce, just out. He had a deal and he couldn't get it through Parliament. If most MPs were Tories, he could. But there's the question, what kind of Brexit? Boris Johnson has said there'll be no more extensions. He's also said he wants to break out of the European Union like the Incredible Hulk, remember? And if no comprehensive trade deals agreed, that's our long-term future relationship, after another tough round of negotiations, we could still face the disruption of a no-deal exit next December.
As a mum to a young daughter, my question to the Conservative Party, what are you doing to our schools and to public services in general?
The Tories are promising to spend more. Who isn't? But Boris Johnson's moved on to Labour territory by promising he'll end austerity and pour cash into hospitals, schools and the police. It's worth noting that the extra £7.1 billion for schools in England, that's about reversing cuts and keeping pace with growing school rolls. The extra money for the police, it'll recruit another 20,000 officers in England and Wales. But it'll rebuild forces that were cut under the last Tory-led coalition government. And as for the NHS, an extra £34 billion a year eventually, that's a lot of cash. But again, the health service needs it, just to meet growing demand and the rising cost of healthcare.
I just wanted to know, what does the Prime Minister mean by come with us?
He means trust me, not the other guy, and that's for you to judge. No party leader can be called hugely popular or trusted just now. Boris Johnson broke his promise to take Britain out of the EU, do or die, by October the 31st. Political opponents say you can't trust his word. Even some Tories have their doubts about his command of detail, for example. Yes, he was a popular London mayor, but that was before Brexit split the country. His party decided he was the one most likely to win. Right now, his personal poll ratings are well ahead of Jeremy Corbyn's, but polls can change, and that's one reason why this could be as personal, maybe as nasty an election campaign as any we've seen.
It was John's analysis there. John Pienaar, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, Labour's Deputy Leader, Tom Watson, is to step down, announcing this evening that he'll not seek re-election as a Member of Parliament and is also resigning as Deputy Leader. In his letter announcing the decision, which was quite a surprise, Mr Watson said his reasons were personal and not political. He's had several public arguments with the leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and his supporters in recent years, as our political correspondent Iain Watson explains now.
The Labour Party and Tom Watson have seemed inextricably linked. Over 3 decades, he's been an official, a minister, a shadow minister and deputy leader. He's had an uneasy relationship with Jeremy Corbyn, but while he's resigning as an MP, he's not defecting to another party.
I'm not walking out on the party. I'm going to be campaigning for our candidates up and down the country until polling day. I'll remain as deputy leader until then. I want to see a Labour government. I want the Labour team to triumph, but it's time for me to go to pastures new.
He was elected as Labour's deputy leader in 2015, at the same time as Jeremy Corbyn, but he often followed his own distinctive agenda. He won plaudits across the political spectrum for campaigning against phone hacking, but came under pressure recently for having used parliamentary privilege to raise allegations of a paedophile ring at Westminster, allegations which were untrue. On Brexit, he increasingly called for Labour unequivocally to back Remain in a new referendum, despite representing an area that voted to leave. He was often at loggerheads with Jeremy Corbyn's supporters. This culminated in a failed attempt to oust him as deputy leader by some on the left on the eve of Labour's conference, without his leader's knowledge. And in his letter to Jeremy Corbyn tonight, Tom Watson praises his leader's decency and courtesy, even in difficult times.
Well, it's a very personal decision, not a political one. I've been in frontline Labour politics for 35 years. I'm 52 years old. I've been on a health journey in recent years, and I want to take a leap and do something new.
Tom Watson was at the head of a group of around 100 moderate Labour MPs. They've lost their standard bearer tonight. The question now is whether some will, like him, walk away from Westminster or stand their ground. Iain Watson, BBC News.
Well, let's return to Birmingham, and our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, is there. And I suppose, Laura, we can draw some kind of conclusion today, which is that no matter how detailed the planning and the strategy for these campaigns, events happen and they can mess things up for the parties.
Yeah, absolutely right, Hugh. It's one of the oldest rules of politics, isn't it? Events, events. And no matter how much money political parties spend on putting on glossy events like that tonight, even the most confident of a political tribe know that they are vulnerable to things going wrong and things that are not in their control, the unforced error or the misspeak of one of their high-profile candidates. But it's worth saying this is not a political party in the Conservatives right now that are confident of victory. They're not just trying to hold on to a majority, they're trying to win one in the first place. Remember, Boris Johnson starts this campaign not capable of forming his own government. And they are nervous in Tory ranks about what will happen and about whether or not their very Brexit-heavy message can actually find appeal across the country and among different groups. There are some similarities to the referendum here. They want the campaign to be dominated by frustrations over Brexit, but this is 2019, not 2016. The Tories believe that there is a path to them being able to secure a majority and return to Downing Street with some kind of victory, even if a scrappy one. But they know that that path is steep and narrow, and there are plenty of rocks in their way, and political enemies and opposition parties champing at the bit to make life hard for them.
Laura, many thanks again. Laura Kuenssberg there with the latest in Birmingham. Well, if we weren't at the start of the general election campaign, today would have been budget day, including the latest assessment of the government finances. Instead, both Conservatives and Labour are putting forward agendas to increase public spending. So instead of the latest forecast from the Treasury, a leading economic research group, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, has released its analysis of how the public finances are doing. Our economics editor, Faisal, has been studying the details.
It was the budget that never was, due today but cancelled by the Chancellor alongside the key update to forecasts for borrowing. Others have done the calculations, and they point to a rather different argument over tax and spend and the difference between them, the deficit, during the election campaign. The different argument over tax and spend and the difference between them, the deficit, during the election campaign.
First up, here's the existing official forecasts for borrowing over the next 5 years. They come from March, and you'll see low deficit, way lower than the 100 billion plus we had a decade ago, basically falling pretty much to zero. And here are what the forecasts could have been, according to the IFS, if the budget had happened today. Much higher in every year. In fact, the deficit staying at around 45 to 50 billion pounds all the way out. Let's focus on the current fiscal year, 55 billion pounds. About half of the increase over the past few months comes from an accounting change to the way that student loans are perceived to be likely to be written off. Then there is the extra spending at spending review on police and schools, and there's also an adjustment for a forecast of lower growth. The question for all the main parties is whether a deficit like this into the future is even considered a problem anymore.
Let's take a look at the existing plans for day-to-day spending over the next couple of years. Up and away in health, education, the Home Office, prisons. You'll be hearing a lot about these 2 years of English spending from the Prime Minister. But looking at the rest of the last decade of spending cuts, it's a different story. Health was spared and is up since 2010, but education spending is still down on 2010 even after the planned rises. And while we will hear a lot about 20,000 new police officers, this chart shows what caused 21,000 to lose their jobs. Some departments, such as Justice, responsible for prisons, still down in funding by over a fifth.
But you're also going to hear a lot about a different form of government spending on infrastructure, on the future, on building up the assets of the nation. Investment spending by the tens of billion, or perhaps by the hundreds of billion.
And while that would normally be prevented by existing rules to limit the national debt, today's missing budget was set to change them anyway. The main political parties now all arguing that the UK should take advantage of low interest rates to gobble up cheap borrowing to invest more. A new election campaign meaning new rules on budgets too. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Now, the Green Party in England and Wales has said that December the 12th should be the climate election, arguing that the future wouldn't get another chance. Launching its campaign, the party called for additional borrowing in order to fund £100 billion of spending a year for the next decade in order to protect the environment.
We know these are dark times. It's easy to fear the future. The threat of Brexit hangs over our heads. The climate emergency rages from the Amazon to the Arctic, and our fragile democracy is under attack. But despite all this, Greens don't fear the future. We are the future.
Sian Berry there of the Green Party. Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other election news now then. The Scottish National Party leader and First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, said demands for a second Scottish independence referendum will become irresistible if her party wins most of Scotland's 59 Westminster seats. She's already said her plans to hold a new vote next year and said the notion of Westminster politicians rejecting a second vote was starting to crumble. The Liberal Democrat leader, Jo Swinson, took to the campaign trail on an electric battle bus with the slogan "Stop Brexit, Build a Brighter Future." She visited a mental health charity in North London, saying that her party would pledge £11 billion to mental health services funded by a penny rise in the basic rate of income tax. Well, with the general election campaign officially underway after the dissolution of Parliament today, how exactly do voters feel about the prospect of heading to the polling station in the run-up to Christmas? Our home editor, Mark Easton, has been to Birmingham, a city surrounded by lots of marginal seats, to meet some of the undecided voters.
The nights are lengthening as the UK tilts away from the sun. At this unscheduled winter election, voters will be more in the dark than ever before, literally. So how does the electorate feel as the campaigning begins? With the help of consultants Britain Thinks, we've gathered together different strands of public opinion in a former textile factory close to where the Prime Minister was in Birmingham today. A balanced group still undecided as to who in this Advent election should get to open the door to number 10.
Now, there wasn't supposed to be an election now, but here we are. I want to know how you feel about the state of UK politics as we start election 2019.
As concerned as I've ever been in my life, if I'm honest. I feel as though it's out of control.
It's embarrassing, isn't it? I think other countries are looking at us and we're just a laughing stock.
I don't feel that it's an embarrassment to the country. I'm quite
proud of how, not necessarily how things are working out at the moment, but that people are stepping back from their own parties and disagreeing with one another.
I think the election's needed to sort of just make the country decide which route they want to go down. And
so this will decide it, you think?
No.
Is this election about the Brexit divide, leave and remain, or is it about left and right, or something else?
It feels like the Brexit election to me, a rerun of choosing which side you're on, really.
It needs to be about the bigger issues like the NHS, crime, education, but it is going to be about Brexit, isn't it? Let's face it.
It used to be very much, you knew exactly where you were with the Conservative Party and with the Labour Party, and now I think there's so much extreme within each party.
There's parties out there that I would never vote for, but actually I do like some of their policies, and then the party that I would vote for, I don't quite like some of theirs, and that's never happened to me before.
With a nod to elections past, we have built ourselves an ometer, and this is contest anything we like. We can make it an integrity-ometer. Do you think our political leaders, our political parties have got integrity?
Is this bad?
That's bad, yeah.
It's quite high, isn't it?
Our sincerity-ometer.
Bring it up to average. I think some are sincere.
I think it goes with integrity for me, so it would be down there.
Now it's an ability-ometer.
I would go all the way.
Really? Full marks on ability? These are talented people.
It will get done.
So I'm going to bring it down. I think bunch of clowns. That's what it is, bunch of clowns. That's my score there.
Come election day, Birmingham's polling stations will open an hour before sunrise and close 6 hours after sunset. The question for Britain is whether undecided voters like these will bring light out of the darkness. Mark Easton, BBC News, Birmingham.
Well, throughout the election campaign, the BBC will be looking at the key issues, explaining the policies that are being talked about and the subjects that sometimes aren't being talked about. Have a look at some of our online explainers at bbc.co.uk/news or on the BBC News app, and you'll see all the content there for you as the campaign progresses.